Okay, so this tutorial is basically going to go through a demo using the Angular Material Design version 10 documentation, and what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on a component which is the expansion panel. So let's take a look at, right now I'm at the Material Design Angular.io site. I just zoomed in on components. On the left side is my component list, but there's a visual representation in this markup fragment here, and I notice I go through and look at all the different components, and the one I'm interested in right now is the expansion panel. And so let's just take a look and see how it's used and what the documentation provides for us, and try to get the best out of what we're being offered here. And we could take these examples, go through them in detail, and then what we're going to do is we're going to look at our own custom examples to determine how to use this particular component appropriately in a real live application. So first, I'm on the documentation here. I'm looking at the overview, and I see this particular example here, which is very interesting. First of all, there's an expansion panel here. There's a title, and there's some sort of description. This is the expansion title. This is the summary of the content. And notice I could expand this, and it says this is the primary content of the panel. And notice there is no icon down here because it's disabled. The icon to expand, like this one here, can be on the right, can be in the left, and that's as far as we want to go right now. Right now, it's not showing at all. So I just want to point that out. Now let's look at the second panel here. This is a self-aware panel. It can detect that it's currently open or closed. Now this is sort of like a description. When I open it, it says currently I'm open, close it, currently I'm closed, and of course I'm visible because I'm open. So it understands its state, whether it's closed and open. Of course, that's valuable for us, and it's the basic expansion panel we're looking at. So let's just get that on the table there. So the other thing you notice is that you've got this icon which is pointing down, and then you expand it, it's pointing up, and you could render this panel expanded or collapsed depending on how you want to do that. But let's take a look at the code. Let's go through the code, and let's determine if we understand the code. So what I'm doing here is not rocket science. I'm just going through the code. I want to understand what the Google documentation is showing us, and I want to make sure I understand this completely before I move on to anything more complicated. So let's take a look at the expansion panel here. So we do have a project here, and we have some files here that are managing the project. And we're rendering the example on the right side here. So let's take a look at this in detail. Okay, so what do we have here? First of all, we have a package.json file which is used to define the packages that are necessary to install using npm to install to run this application. So I notice that the package.json file shows me how to run, how to build, how to test, how to run lint, and also there's dependencies here. And basically, when I look at this file, I know I have to do an npm install to actually get this application running. But what I look for is what versions of these packages am I actually using. So I notice I'm using 10. I notice that RxJS is 6.5.5, which is what I'm expecting. And then I look at some dev dependencies. What I see is what you would typically see, but what I don't see is any of the Jasmine and Karma test scripts and Protractor and stuff like that, which is fine. My TypeScript is 3.9 here, so that's good news. And so that's the package.json file. Now the Angular.json file is Angular's CLI uses this to define the whole project workspace and to define everything associated with the workspace and the projects within my workspace. So right now, here's my project material AIO example, and I have a source root. The project type is application. Here's my style sheets are SCSS. What else? We have options. The compiler options ahead of time compiling is true. And here's the important thing I look for. Oh, here's the index file that's driving the single page application, and here is the main module that I'm using to run my application. So that's the important thing. There we have an assets folder, and we also are pointing to the tsconfig file for this particular app. So we know what this file is. It has the configuration for the project, and it's pointing to everything my project might need, and shows me how to run, etc. Now, the tsconfig file is basically saying this project is a TypeScript file, and here's my compiler options. Here's other options associated with where configuration of my TypeScript within my workspace, and also there's and then this app JSON file, we just saw that in the Angular JSON file. This is going to extend that TypeScript file and provide certain associated project application information like the files, etc. So let's dig into the example real quick. Let's go to let's look at the main. We looked at the index.html, right? So the index.html has this custom tag, which is a root component. But the root component needs to be loaded by the main module, which is this main.ts. And the main.ts really defines the module. As you could see, it's on the bottom. It's exporting this app module, and it's bootstrapping it. But it's also, the app module is bootstrapping the expansion overview example, which is the root component. So if you look at this at a very high level, it's importing everything we need, including this material module, which includes the expansion panel module imported and exported so my components can use it. And of course, I'm importing the root component, which is what this component is made out of. This is the index.html, which is rendering the root component. Okay, so that makes me now want to say, well, what does my root component do? So I go here to my root component, and I'm looking at my root component, and it doesn't seem to be too complicated. It has a panel open state, which obviously is false, closed, but when you open it, it turns true. So the HTML markup and the dynamic binding in the Angular must be setting this value and rendering different strings as I'm opening and closing this panel. And like I said, the material design module must have the expansion module in it. So let's see what it has here as far as providing the functionality. Right here, here it is. It's the expansion module. So this is just a convenience file for us to put all the material design modules in it and export them all so my application could access whatever it needs. In this case here, this application absolutely needs the expansion panel. So let's find out where that is. We saw it up here. And now we're seeing it down here. Right here. So this gives my components access to that module. Okay, so let's look at the module itself. We looked at this. Let's look at the HTML. Okay, let's go back here. Notice that this does have a template path, and so this is the template that is showing and rendering this markup fragment. There's also a style sheet. So before I look at the template, let me look at the style sheet. There's not much there. And so here's the expansion panel. I'm using this thing is referred to as an accordion, and inside the accordion there is two expansion panels. The first one has a header title. This is an expansion title. That's this right here. And there's a map panel description. This is the summary of the content, which is right here. And this is the primary content of the panel. If I open it up, it's the primary content. So this panel is very easily rendered using these tags and these selectors, and it's what the component gives you out of the box is these custom tags to do what you need to do, to define what you need to define in my panel. So that one is pretty straightforward. Let's look at the second panel. Now, notice first of all, before I go on, let's remove this hide toggle. Notice the toggle shows up. Let's put it back. Now it's hidden. And you could put the toggle on the left side too. Okay, now let's look at this panel. This panel has some actions. Panel state equals true, panel state equals false, and these events opened closed of the expansion panel basically can set the state. And that's the state of the attribute in the object instance, in the component object instance. We're setting it to true, we're setting it to false. We click open, we click closed, and therefore I set this state. Now here's the title of the panel, the header, right? It says self-aware panel, currently I am, and then there's this interpolation directive with this ternary operator, and whatever the panel state is in the object instance, if it's true, we say it's open. If it's closed, we say it's closed. So here I'm closed, here I am open. And this is the expansion panel header. So that's really all I wanted to show you of this particular example. And let's move on to other examples.